Okay. Is everybody? Yeah, it looks like folks are in. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Marc McGovern, Cambridge City Councilor and co-chair of the Healthy Children Task Force, uh, along with Ava Goldman, who is the other co-chair and is a Cambridge resident, Cambridge parent, and pediatrician at the Boston Medical Center. If you have joined our uh, panels before, welcome back. If this is your first time, welcome. If you don't know what the Healthy Children's Task Force does, just real quickly, we were a task force that was founded in the 90s by a Cambridge City Council ordinance, sponsored by, at the time, City Councilor Henrietta Davis. And it was to bring together professionals, caregivers, policymakers, general folks in the community to come together to really discuss and think more concretely about physical and mental health of children, and then to at times make recommendations to the city council and the school committee, but also to really just speak amongst ourselves and train and talk about ways in which we can improve children's physical and mental health. If you've heard of the Agenda for Children, that was an initiative that came out of the Healthy Children Task Force. Also I always get it wrong, I think it's the 521 campaign around sort of healthy eating and exercise. That came out of the Healthy Children's Task Force, and then they kind of went on to become their own thing in the city. We've done work on the school to prison pipeline, developed a parenting handbook, and for the last couple of years have been doing these panel discussions on topics that folks have asked us about and things that seem to be relevant and important to parents and caregivers and professionals who work with young people. So that's kind of who we are. So I want to welcome the panelists and say thank you so much. We have a great group, folks will be introduced with all their expertise and credentials. So thank you so much for giving your time to be here. And I'm going to turn it over to Deirdre Logan, who is also a member of the Healthy Children's Task Force and is a Cambridge resident, a Cambridge parent, is an attending psychologist at Children's, and is a professor of psychology at the Harvard Medical School. So Deirdre, I'm going to turn it over to you to take it from here. If folks can leave their cameras off so that we can focus on the panelists and stay muted. And if you have any questions that you want to ask, please put them in the chat. I will be monitoring that. And then when we get to that point in the discussion, we'll make sure that we get to as many questions as we can. So I think that's everything. So Deirdre, I'm going to kick it to you.
Great. Thanks, Marc. So welcome, everyone. Our topic tonight is peer relationships in the digital age, a panel discussion about bullying, social media, and reasons for hope. And we have a fantastic team of child psychologists, all of whom are based at Children's Hospital and Harvard Medical School. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce them, and then I will throw out questions that we pulled from your registrations, your areas of interest that you indicated when you signed up. And as Marc said, you can also put questions in the chat and we will work those in along the way. So let me just introduce our panelists to get started. We have Dr. Erica Lee, who is an attending psychologist in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at Boston Children's Hospital and an assistant professor of psychology in the Department of Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. We have Dr. Jason Fogler, who is the co-director of the ADHD program in the Division of Developmental Medicine at Boston Children's Hospital and an associate professor of pediatrics and psychology at Harvard Medical School. And we have Keneisha Sinclair-McBride, Dr. Keneisha Sinclair-McBride, who is an associate chief of the Integrated Behavioral Health Service, an attending psychologist in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at Boston Children's, and an assistant professor of psychology in the Department of Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. And all three of these esteemed psychologists have spoken several times together on this topic and have a great depth and breadth of knowledge in this area. So we're very fortunate that they've agreed to join us tonight. I'm going to go ahead and kick things off just to kind of set the stage a little bit, I'll ask our panelists, when we talk about kind of peer relationships in the digital age, what do you all think has changed most dramatically for children and adolescents over the last decade?
Us off. I think that like one of the biggest shifts is the fact that we went from digital relationships being like kind of an adjunct or a side kind of component to kids' social lives and friendships, or even like mostly people I know in real life that I also talk to online or something like that, to being kind of the main place that a lot of kids socialize. So it's this shift in percentage of time that is spent socializing in digital spaces. I don't know what you guys think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's kind of wild, even just to think about 10 years is so long and so short in regards to how fast the technology is moving. I think a lot about how technology is so much more present and integrated into kids' lives since birth. Like, even thinking about the technology that new parents use to manage their daily lives, there's kind of no getting away from technology. It's not really a choice. There is a real adaptive function to having to understand technology, but that we are surrounded by it from the moment that we come into the current world.
And I'd just add, right, from the pandemic, we went immediately to curriculum online. And yes, we got back into the classroom, and yet curriculum is still on Chromebooks. And yet we still need to be plugged in. So no matter what, you need to have an interface. So can you get me the assignment has now become a text, and that spirals into other domains very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to reflect in hearing that, my children are technically not children anymore. They are young adults. And I remember when they were young, we used to have these screen-free weeks, and you would take your whole family off screen for a week. And I don't remember the last time anyone has ever suggested that that is something that is possible anymore. So it definitely has evolved very quickly. Let me ask, much of the public conversation really kind of focuses on the harms of particularly social media. What do you think caregivers and educators are getting right, and what do you think they're getting wrong about kind of the current state of youth digital life, particularly around social media?
I can start us off here. What I hear a lot from folks is both that folks are more panicked than maybe I think we always need to be, especially for most kids. And there are some things that we might not be paying as much attention to that maybe requires more attention. So I think it's not as quite as bad as sometimes it can seem, especially when it comes to social media, which is such a hot button, easy topic, and sometimes clickbait in the popular press. And we do need to be sort of really intentional about what does it mean for kids to be using social media, especially at young ages, and that often parents and educators are playing catch up as to what they're learning much after the fact, when it's much harder to kind of understand and to rein things in. So I don't think it's as bad as it seems, and I think there are some really important things that we should be keeping track of from an early age.
Exactly. There's a lot of fear mongering, and like that's like what gets people to click and gets them to pay attention to the news and feel kind of like they're doing something wrong, right? But there is the fact that some kids are finding connection and community in digital spaces in a way that they might not be able to in in real life. But there's also the fact that, there's so much talk right now about like social media's connection to mental health concerns, and there is a very real association. But I am starting to think that we should kind of start talking about how it is a using social media is often a component of what's going on for those kids, but it's not the that's propelling. Often when we see kids who are really struggling with their digital media use, they have another mental health condition that is like kind of precipitating the struggles with use. So it's kind of all mixed up together, and not like my kid has Instagram, they're gonna fall down the mental health rabbit hole.
Yeah, I just add to that, I mean, yes, we should all be concerned about Tide Pod challenges. We should all be concerned about looks maxing. I'm gravely concerned about kids holding up with their phones late into the night, right? I'm very concerned about kids' sleep getting eroded. I am very concerned about kids not getting their activities and chores done in the name of social media. It's the small things that are getting eroded even more than the big things that make it to the news.
Yeah, that's a great point to think about. Um, I think another thing that comes up is caregivers often express a worry that, that online interactions are inherently less meaningful than in-person social interactions. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, what does the research tell us about differences between digital versus face-to-face socializing?
So there is a kernel of truth. Screens, you do not get as much of an oxytocin hit, which is the attachment chemical. So there is a kernel of truth there. If you are hanging out on Zoom meetings all day, yes, you are not feeling quite as connected. That is a kernel of truth. That said, we are still having a conversation. We are still connecting today. We are still going to exchange information. I'm going to challenge channel Michael Rich, who we call the mediatrician around here, who talks about the idea of balance. I think we should have balance of our in real life and online relationships. And if we have those, we should get to a good space. It's hardly an all or nothing thing. That ship has sailed.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think, there is something about in-person interaction that genuinely is more challenging. There's a lot more stimulation. There's a lot more to kind of have to manage kind of in a live environment. And there's something very real about digital relationships as well, right? That just because someone is part of an online community or has friends that they met, through social media or through some sort of other technology driven way does not necessarily make those relationships any less rich, especially for our kids who have difficulty sort of building community in their physical environment or connecting with people who have, similar interests or similar life experiences. And so I think it's important to be thinking about balance, as Dr. Fogler is saying, but also what are the pros and cons to these different types of relationships for a particular kid.
I want to add that sometimes people end up socializing on technology even when they're in person with each other. So like a bunch of teenagers sitting, and everybody's looking at their own phone. That feels like we're missing something, right? Like we could actually be talking to the people in front of us. So that's where like the kind of the nuance between the two kind of loses its like it's weight, where it's like talk to each other in person.
Yes, I've seen that many times. All the kids sitting around on the couch together on their phones. So on that topic of balance, we did definitely get several questions that I think tap into that. And they're overlapping, but I want to ask them because I think people may have different areas of interest here. So one is, many children themselves report that social media, texting, gaming, group chats, that's where their friendships happen. That's where they really can connect and form their relationships. So parents have asked, how can families support healthy participation in that while discouraging, constant connectivity?
Putting some structure around when people have access to certain things, or some like kind of general rules, and keeping it simple. It doesn't have to be like 16 different rules, but just like, do we all not charge our phones in the bedroom? Like that's a great way for like people to not mess up their sleep dealing with social media. Or like, do we not use phones at dinner? You can only play video games for this amount of time. Like just trying to have some structure, because I think that the free for all nature of it and the fact that it's always available kind of makes parents kind of nervous. And then I think that just being nosy, like asking what they're doing, asking who they're talking to, kind of being a little bit annoying about it, is good, because like we are playing catch up. The adults don't know what's going on. So you might learn kind of what the next thing is before you see a news article about it.
Oh, absolutely. I agree. And I think also too, in relation to that, it's still important for parents to have some lens into what's happening in those chats, like not necessarily reading them in real time, just given the thousands of text messages that kids are sending each other a day, especially on some sort of group thread, but having some sense of like what's happening there. So for so many of our young people, it's FOMO, right? They're so worried about missing out about what's happening, even if it's not even that important, that there are genuine connections or sort of like silly inside jokes that are happening on the group chats. But also sometimes it's stuff that's maybe not so healthy for them, and either do they sort of feel like they have to get sucked into it because they need to keep abreast of what's happening, but actually parents need to have some sense, and because we're always playing catch up, as you just mentioned, as to what's happening in those chats, and is it actually serving your child more than it's harming them, if it's harming them.
And make room for play dates, right? You can always mix it in, right? Come over and play the video game. have the community of parents talking about, let's have this day for the online game, and this day we'll all get together. And there are ways to make it work together, not compete against each other.
If you think particularly about, I guess they're not the youngest media users anymore, but sort of that preteen, like 8 or 9 to 11-year-old group where they're really starting to dive into this, any particular tips on how parents can kind of foster independence in that realm, but not let them have that unrestricted access?
I'm entering this stage in real time because our oldest will be 9 next month. Um, I think that as much as people can try to delay full access to everything, we know just more about what this all looks like than we did like 5 years ago. Developmentally, that's key. And starting like with baby steps of having access, right? Like in terms of, I know some people are using sort of like the smartwatches or like dumb phones that don't have all the capabilities, but you can still text a set number of people that your parents say you can text and all that sort of stuff. So just kind of like walking people towards those steps, but still letting them have the interaction with their friends. I think that where I really get concerned is when I have like really young kids who clearly are like locked in on TikTok. They know every trend. They know how to speak, and I'm just like, what? Like that's just it's not developmentally appropriate, and it's too much too soon, kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think also too for parents, like oftentimes folks sometimes get sucked into it being like all or nothing. Like either I allow my child sort of unfettered access to all the things because they've been bugging me. They want TikTok, they want Snapchat, they want Instagram. They want to be able to text their friends. Or it feels like I have to just completely say no, otherwise it's going to become so unwieldy fast. So I think that gradual approach really helps, but also having open conversations with your kids about the need for it to be not only developmentally appropriate, but also for to build trust around those processes, right? That like giving you this level of independence, like let's kind of like see how it goes, see how it impacts you, see if you get the benefit out of it that you're hoping to get out of it, or are there any potential things that we should be keeping an eye on of potential downsides, and then gradually increasing independence from there rather than trying to kind of turn it all on or turn it all off. I think a lot of parents have found that kind of more gradual approach to feel a bit more comfortable.
And you can go backwards. You don't have to keep going in a direction if it seems like that is not working for your kid or it's not working for your family. We can kind of rethink and change things around too.
Yeah, great advice. Let's segue a little bit into one of the topics that was part of this, which is more this question of bullying, particularly online bullying and peer conflict and navigating those kinds of things. Um, and I'd love your thoughts on what you think in terms of how bullying has changed in this era where like social interactions are 24/7, that you have parents and caregivers have often no idea what just happened. Their child is right in front of them, and yet they've just had some social interaction because it was in their pocket. Uh, so how does that look different where these kinds of negative interactions can happen through gaming platforms, social media, all of those things? And also if you have thoughts on kind of how caregivers and communities could respond when harmful interactions start to kind of spill into real time, particularly like in school.
Oh, did you? I mean, you've answered the question, right? The acceleration of it is what's different. Um, Very quickly, our kids' moods can change because the mean text came in right there at the dinner table, as opposed to they came home in a stormy mood because of something that happened on the corner. I would say the same advice applies, but I'd encourage, a real openness about, listen, you can tell me anything. Um, are you okay? I know you will never go wrong with saying I noticed. Hey, I noticed your mood just changed right there. And it seemed to change when you got that text. Can we talk about that? And to really be thoughtful about, friends do not hurt each other and friends do not say mean things to each other. And I think schools, for the most part, do a good job of creating cultures of respect. Where I wish sometimes schools would do better is when they say, well, I didn't see it, didn't happen on my grounds. There is a law, by the way, that says if it disrupts school activity, They need to do something about it. And parents should not feel shy at all about saying, listen, this is disrupting the school environment. School, you've got to get involved. But I broadly, I would say having just open communication with your kids and having a policy of like, let me see your phone, let me see what you're seeing, so that it's not a barrier, who's saying things to you. And I'm curious what doctors Sinclair-McBride and Lee would have to say.
You started it off really, really well. I'm just thinking back to like when I give a lecture to our psychiatry fellows about kind of how do you approach bullying when your patients are experiencing it. And I often talk to them about this study that I worked on now like 12 years ago in graduate school, where we found that what we were calling cyber victimization at the time, which is now just like digital, like smartphone, everything, bullying was was associated with depression over and above other kinds of bullying, the traditional kinds of bullying. And like I think we're seeing the effects of that now, right? Because it's pervasive. You don't know exactly who's seeing what. People are like recording things about you. There's just so many different layers to it. And so reducing the shame and kind of having those open lines of communication, like Dr. Fogler is talking about, is a big piece, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Great advice from both of you. And I think really even sort of trying to be, hopefully this isn't happening to your kids, but even being proactive about it, right? Is letting them know, like, hey, one of the things, because they may already know about cyberbullying, but maybe they don't, especially for our younger kids who are just sort of entering that world or getting some of that gradual, access to the social media apps, is sort of letting them know, like, sometimes people can say really mean things. So going off of what Dr. Fogler was saying about, like, well, here's the definition of what actually like a healthy and nurturing friendship is, but here are some things to look out for, because sometimes we don't realize it, especially if it's a quote unquote friend or someone we know from school or someone that we like or admire saying mean things to us. Here's some things to kind of look out for. And if these things happen, I really want to make sure that you can let me know, so we can talk about it and think about what we're going to do about it together. I think to Dr. Logan's question about, the school piece is also just asking your schools, right? Like pretty much all schools now, have like a sort of anti-bullying stance and sort of like a set of protocols around what happens when bullying occurs. But cyberbullying is becoming more and more part of that pie. And so asking them, how do you address this? Are there workshops that you all give to the students? Like if you hear that this thing is happening, like what are the procedures? So even just knowing, even if it's hopefully not happening to your child, but that if you hear about it, or if it should happen to your child down the line, you have some sense already of what you should do and what the school resources are. But I think not being shy about asking the school, what their protocols are and how they can partner with you to address these concerns is really important.
So another question we got on this topic, I think is a tough one, in that it asks, how do parents deal with things like social exclusion, which maybe isn't bullying, but the fact that you can get on your phone and see that like your six best friends all just went to the mall together and no one told you, and you can see that now in a way that never was true, for the rest of us growing up. How do you help kids navigate that sort of sense of just social exclusion that doesn't necessarily cross the line into being targeted or bullied in a more obvious or sort of deliberate way?
I know it may feel different. This is a great question. And I think for a lot of people, it can feel, a lot of kids may feel more painful when it's virtual because they may not know, they're almost being sort of left out of genuinely like another universe where they know stuff is happening, but they're not part of it. Or a lot of times, right, I hear from so many, especially teenagers, that they will see on social media that other kids are doing stuff so that they know, right, that they've been excluded. And again, it may not be intentional, it might just be, for any number of reasons why they're not being part of those groups, even if it's not explicit bullying. But I think actually the conversation is broader, is that even if they may have more awareness of it, or you can, like, I don't know, track people and see where they are, tracking their location, that kind of thing, so you know that your friends are together. In some ways it's not any different than the other types of exclusion that kids have often faced, as they're going through childhood and adolescence, and talking with your kids about, like, well, what does it feel like to be left out, and what does it mean, and what are the friendships that feel really nurturing and inclusive that you can lean into, and also just how do we sit with the feelings of, feeling really hurt and left out and rejected, that those in some ways are above and beyond sort of the electronic space.
Love that, Dr. Lee. But also, I'm thinking too of like, we don't know what we're seeing beyond what's on the feed, right? Like it's still the highlight reel, what people choose to share. Invoking our colleague, the mediatrician again, he talks about a story where one of his patients was super upset because her best friends were like hanging out together at like some outdoor mall or something, and she was like horrified that they didn't move her. But she stayed calm. Parents helped her kind of think through it, and she talked to her friends later. What ended up happening is they both were on what they considered a boring shopping trip with their families, ended up meeting each other and taking a picture, right? So it wasn't like that they had actually been excluding her. They're like, oh my goodness, now I have someone to hang out with, and they took the picture. But if she had not asked those questions, she wouldn't have never known.
That was brave of her, though, to ask that question. She had to put herself out there. That's a tough one. All right, another question on this topic is kind of the flip side. What do you do if you start to suspect or see some kind of evidence that your child is maybe the aggressor in some way, in some kind of online, conflict with peers?
Going to channel another colleague, Peter Rafali, who created the Bullying and Cyberbullying Prevention and Advocacy Collaborative. And he would be the first to say that bullies are kids too. And I would counsel those parents to pull their kid aside and just see what are they trying to do? What are they trying to say? What are they trying to get out of it? And usually it's about enhancing status. It might be about they were feeling victimized by somebody and they feel like they're getting back at them. Um, to me, it's an opportunity to do some problem solving and to do some corrective education and ultimately to get to, listen, we can't be doing that, but also to figure out what skills are deficient. And yes, if it's a chronic problem, yeah, there probably needs to be some discipline, but there also needs to be a way, much like a kid who's solving problems with their hands because they're not feeling comfortable using their words, right? The mean texting is serving a similar function. And it's an opportunity to try to do some skill building and rehabilitating, as well as, if necessary, doing some discipline. I hope that helps.
That's great, Dr. Fogler. I've shared the link to that wonderful program in the chat for folks in case it's a useful resource. But I think I'm really appreciate that you asked this question, Dr. Logan, because often we think about the kids who are being targeted themselves, but what happens if the kids themselves are the ones who are maybe being the aggressors or kind of acting on it? Again, bigger picture, sort of helping kids understand sort of, well, what were your goals here? Why did you engage in that behavior? What were you hoping to accomplish? Did it work? How does it feel? And really just thinking through the consequences. And I feel like it's such a set of general statements that we're often trying to teach our kids anyway, is to think a little bit more about their actions and what drives them, and what the outcomes are, and if that aligns with what they had hoped for or not, and are there better ways and healthier ways to go about achieving those goals.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I think it's a tough one for parents because there's sort of a shame in thinking that your kid may be out there in some way hurting another kid, but helping your child kind of work through that can be super important. All right, we're going to pivot a little bit to specifically the environment of kind of gaming and online communities where there can be interaction with maybe a broader range of people, maybe not just the friends you know in real life. Many parents have concerns about these kind of open gaming platforms and online communities. So curious what you all would say are the biggest risks, and maybe if there are misconceptions that you think are common, helpful to hear about those as well.
I think it's very developmental. Like I think I hear from older teens that they like get that there could be bad actors or people pretending or catfishing. Like they talk about that a lot. And then like for younger kids, I think that they really don't know that someone might not be who they say they are unless you kind of start explaining that to them and providing them with that internet safety sort of literacy. Mm. I think you have to start there because a lot of kids are literal and they're going to take things at face value. If this person says they're 12 like me, they're 12, right? But having kids to start having that sort of being more reflective is like the first step in dealing with this, I think.
Yeah, I would agree. It makes me think a lot too about just like this general idea of catfishing, but also that kids naturally, because they are more innocent in a really beautiful way, a lot of the time, take what other people say at face value. And often what I hear of is sort of like the biggest area of risk, to your question, Dr. Logan, in sort of these online gaming forums is often the chat. is like the directions that some of these conversations go, especially because you really don't know who you're talking to, can range really wildly. And sometimes the conversations become incredibly developmentally inappropriate or offensive. And then kids are sort of unsure what to do with that information, or kind of how to respond and act in those situations. And so thinking with kids about how to limit those risks, or even something where it's like, you could be on Roblox, but you're not allowed to have access to chat or something like that, can be helpful.
The only thing,
Deirdre,
sorry, go ahead, Mark.
oh, hi, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Finish this up. Go ahead. There's a question in the
Oh,
chat.
sure.
Go
No,
ahead,
I was
Jason.
just going to say the only thing I would add to that really terrific advice is parents have an open policy with your kids about, listen, I'm going to come in, I'm going to read the chat. Back in the day, it was very clear, TV after 9 o'clock at night was probably going to be a little bit more adult. And that's probably a good policy to have about when should you be online gaming, right? After a certain time of night, probably more adults are going to be on, and probably more adults who swear are going to be on. And there might be some reasonable policies around, yeah, don't think you should be on around that time of night. Small things like that can make a big difference. Sorry, Mark, go ahead.
Um, no, fine. Not I didn't want to get too far away. This is a question about the sort of the previous bullying piece of the conversation. When does typical peer conflict become bullying, and what can parents do differently in those situations?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I got distracted. I was about to type an answer. The definition of bullying in the textbooks is it's a systematic deployment of a power imbalance. Right. So a couple of volleys of back and forth name calling, right? That's a conflict. A systematic day after day of picking on a kid. And by the way, I'm going to get my friends to pick on this kid, right? A systematic abuse of power on someone. That's when it's bullying. And that's when it is plenty in folks' rights to ask school personnel to intervene, to maybe call another child's parents that this is going too far. This is more than just a simple disagreement.
Great, thank you.
Response. Thanks, Jason. Okay, let's turn a little bit to the topic of mental health and also neurodiversity and how those pieces may interact with social media. Dr. Sinclair-McBride touched on this really briefly at the start. But families wonder sometimes whether social media causes anxiety and mood symptoms, depression. What does the evidence tell us currently? I know there are some good studies at this point.
Associations, they vary, right? But the problem with association is that we don't really know, right? Is it kids who are more anxious use more social media, or does social media make kids more anxious? Like, we're not exactly able to tease that apart. But one of the things I kind of think about is it may not, if you're anxious or you're depressed, we may not want to start with more time on social media as like what will help you, right? We want to be more in real life behavior activation in terms of like doing things, moving your body, getting sleep, all that kind of stuff. Um, because there is a component of this that we know, like getting less sleep means that you're going to have struggles with your mood. There's a really strong association there. And as Dr. Fogler was saying, a big thing with social media is people being on their phones all night. So well, I guess what I'm saying is that there are so many possible ways these things can be connected that it's not as simple as being able to say, for every kid who goes on social media, it's going to make them more depressed and anxious. But there are some confusing little things that kind of connect with each other that we need to pay attention to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of parents, sometimes struggle with like, well, my child's been having a harder time, and there's lots of reasons, right? Like they're more stressed at school, or they're having difficulty with friends, or something's happening kind of, in their extracurriculars that's not going so great, or they're stressed at home, whatever it is. And yet I've also started to notice this pattern where they're isolating more, they're in their room more, they don't want to talk to me, they're just kind of on their phone all day. And I think tracking those kinds of patterns is helpful, right? Is like, well, what's the bigger picture of what might be going on again for your individual child? child and your individual family? And are you noticing that there's some correlation, right? This association that Dr. Sinclair-McBride is pointing to between increased screen time and some of this other stuff that's going on that may be worsening it, but actually sometimes it's helpful, right? Like kids are feeling really isolated at school, and now they've found, again, hopefully healthy relationships online that make them feel sort of included and understood, and give them a little bit more meaning in some way. And so trying to have that, again, I think it always comes back to kind of the relationship with parents and kids and having those open conversations to try to understand how are they using that social media, how does that maybe track on to or coincide with maybe some of these concerns around anxiety and depression, because it's often not quite so simple as I use more social media, I become more anxious, even if that is part of the picture for a given child.
Thank you. What about kids who are neurodivergent in various ways, ADHD, autism spectrum? Are there unique considerations for helping those kids kind of navigate social media, online gaming, those kinds of environments?
Uh, please go ahead.
Yeah, we were both like nodding, yes, yes, lots of important considerations for our kiddos who have neurodivergence. One of the things that is seen a lot in the digital wellness lab and the Center for Problematic Media Use at Children's is that a lot of kids who really struggle with like managing their gaming or managing kind of the way they navigate their digital worlds have ADHD or are on the autism spectrum. And part of it is just like the way that the differences in which their brains work and process information, and the ways in which online and interactive media provides that kind of feedback loop. So I'm gonna pass to see what else that Dr. Fogler wanted to say about that.
Oh, sure. There are a couple of pathways. So one, it's often the case that for these young people, if school is a frustrating place for them, often gaming is a place where they experience mastery. And if they are not great at sports, gaming is a place where they find community. And so you can imagine this kind of multiplicative effect where here's a place where I feel good, and they have these brains that are wired for these feedback loops. And before you know it, their lives get out of balance in a hurry. These are also kids who are prone to get into very bad sleep cycles. So what you see are these sort of cascades. And so, yes, I would say to parents to teach moderation, even if initially gaming looks like this great thing that their kids have discovered.
Yeah, such great insights. Thank you both. I think the only thing I would add to that is, Dr. Rafali over at the Backpack Clinic also often reminds us, right, that kids who have neurodevelopmental differences are at a higher risk anyway for peer victimization. And so, they're in these spaces that are largely often unregulated. We're just sort of like, what's happening? And often we're talking about what's happening for kids who are typically developing. But for kids who are neurodivergent, that they may be at greater risk for sort of exploitation or, not following what's happening or getting kind of pulled into things that could be quite harmful to them, whether or not they're really fully following the impact on them.
Thank you. Most of the rest of these questions kind of get us into the realm of let's have some action steps. What can, to start off with, caregivers actually do? So one of the questions is, parents often feel like they're competing against the fact that everyone else is online all the time in all the ways. What advice do you have for encouraging healthy limits realistically and balancing that with not having their child be socially ostracized and isolated?
Mm. The thing that's sort of interesting is that we kind of view social media and digital tech as like this thing that like we have to do what other parents are doing, when I don't necessarily hear people saying that about other things. Like if your kid said to you, everybody else has like three desserts at dinner and our family doesn't, this is so annoying. You would just be like, whatever, this is what we do. This is in our family, we have different rules. But like for some reason we've decided that this is the thing that like we're going to be really uncomfortable with kind of going on our own because it is uncomfortable, right? Kind of because there's sort of this implicit idea of like, if I say my kid is not doing XYZ, that means I think I'm better than these other people? And also, is my kid going to be like left out of certain things? So there's like this balance, right? But the thing that I think is really helpful is like when it becomes a community sort of decision, right? Like it's hard for one family to make a huge change. But if kind of everybody in the friend group's like, let's all wait till they turn 13 to get a phone, it just makes it so much easier. Or like, let's not have them on Snapchat. It's just so much easier if you can kind of get started from there. But if you're coming at it from a different angle where people are already doing it all the time, we have to start thinking about it from the perspective of what works for my kid and my family.
Yeah, great advice. And I think too, just sort of a bigger picture, a lot of what we're trying to nurture in our kids in regards to wanting to do what everyone else is doing is actually confidence in knowing yourself, right? And I think most parents would probably agree this is important to them as like a general goal. They're trying to raise like sort of a self-assured kid with healthy self-esteem, and sort of actually continuing to push on that piece too, that in some ways it is about the immediate decision around how old do you have to be to get Snapchat. In some ways it's much bigger than that, right? Is like, how do we help you feel comfortable, like knowing that it's difficult, and I'm not, again, doesn't have to be all or nothing, that you're either on all of the apps and in every single group thread, or you're not at all. But like if there's some middle ground that doesn't match whoever the most accessible kid is, or the most permissive parent, is that necessarily a bad thing? And are there other ways in which you can feel good about yourself knowing that it's not going to be the same as the other kids? Because the peer pressure is genuinely immense, and parents fall prey to that as well.
Mark, looks like you want
Questions.
to say something.
Yeah, I have a question. So, a couple things. So the folks who are tuned in probably know this because I say it at nauseum at city council meetings. But the panelists don't know that I'm also an LICSW with 30 years of experience working with children. So I've done a lot of these sort of conversations. And one tool that I used with my own children as well as work with parents is um, doing some role playing with their kids, because their kids don't, if they're over somebody else's house or they're in some situation and they know they're not supposed to be doing something, but there's that peer pressure. Obviously, some of it's just natural. They're going to give into it because that's what kids do. But they often don't have the words or know, how do I get out of this situation? So practice with your kids, right? Do some role playing. What happens if someone says, your friend says this to you? What are you going to say? How do what's your excuse to get yourself kind of out of that situation? So that was one thing I wanted to mention. And then the other, from a professional, so my youngest kids are twins who are now 15. So it's been a little while since I had a newborn. But, when we left the hospital, we got a whole lot of information about a whole lot of things about dealing with newborns, but we didn't get any information about this. And so what ends up happening is, what I find is that parents come to us, or, will come in when the child's already 13 and they've already done all these sort of permissive things because the peer pressure on the parents, right, that it gets harder to dial it back at that point. So what can we do professionally to really be educating new parents of, say, look, this is what you're going to be seeing in the next couple of years, and here are some things you can do to set the stage, because it's much harder to roll that stuff back when you're 13 years into it. So what can we do? What do we do?
I love that, but between the lines of the role play is parents reflecting on what they're modeling, right? That's what I really loved about your role play exercise, right? What am I conveying if I'm on my phone at the dinner table? And these are wonderful opportunities to have parents reflect on, what do I want to convey about my relationship to screens? And maybe I want to be thoughtful about having, no screens at dinner, or I'm going to be very conscious about, I am putting this away because I don't want to be distracted driving you to your baseball game. And sometimes, subtle cues like that can go a long way about, I can stand up for safety or my interests or what have you. So I really appreciate you bringing that up, Mark.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a great question. And I think, sometimes even there's been this, what I think is a really lovely push by folks like our folks here at the Digital Wellness Lab or the American Academy of Pediatrics. There are actually all these wonderful resources online now that walk families through how do you create a family media plan? And a lot of it, to Mark, your really great point, it feels reactive, but again, we can be proactive of like, oh, like we have clear families often have really clear values of like, what kind of kid do we want our kids to be? Like, like we want them to be polite. We want them to, I don't know, make their beds. We want them to get to school on time, whatever it is. But also, can we be more intentional and be thinking as a family around like, well, what are our family values and expectations and goals as it relates to media use? And that's not just the kids, right? That's not just saying like you guys need to limit your use, but also as you're pointing to, sort of like, well, what are we doing as parents and how are we as a family trying to nurture digital wellness, recognizing that we're not going back. If anything, it's just going to continue to accelerate. There's new technologies. We don't even know what they're going to be yet, 6 months from now, but like being really thoughtful around how do we incorporate this into our family's daily life.
Just added
Absolutely.
the digital wellness lab family guide in there too, just to give people a starting point for how to think through some of these plans as a family.
Yeah. And I will just
Thank you.
add, I
We have
think I know we'll go to that question next. I saw
yeah,
that.
sorry.
But
If
I
you
will
could
just
see it,
add,
Deidre,
when Dr. Sinclair-McBride was giving the like, well, our family wouldn't allow kids to have three desserts. Three desserts were bad when we were kids. And I think parents still didn't deal with this stuff when they were kids. I guess this is a short-term problem, and pretty soon we'll have parents who did grow up with all of this. But I think a lot of us just feel kind of in the dark because we don't know what this does, and the research doesn't yet really tell us what the long-term implications are. So I think it is unique in that we're all kind of flailing around without our own experiences to draw from, and that's a particular challenge. But I love the idea of the sort of family modeling and really asking yourself, what are you doing and what are you showing your kids? So the question that came up, and it sort of segues us into the next topic, which is sort of the role of school clinicians, communities, the people around us. The question was, what if you set these rules, like my child cannot be on Instagram, and then your child is on a sports team, and all of the communication about where and when to go to be on that team is happening on some channel that you have said is not going to be the thing that your child is allowed to do. How do you navigate that dilemma?
That's a
Um,
rough one.
Go ahead.
What one thought is that there be like just like you guys have a family Instagram account where you follow the team and like everybody has access to it, but we don't follow other people. Could a parent follow it?
Yeah.
Things like that. I
Yeah,
see
no,
I see Dr. Fogler nodding.
oh no, we encountered our own house. My daughter was on cross country. The coach chose to do that. So we made a family account and we were very vocal about our feelings about it. But we had to get to the practices. We had to get to the game, and we were very explicit about this is why we're doing this. And we made it sort of a values conversation. We have to do this in order to. But yeah, no, it's a tough situation, Bridget. I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah, it's really hard. And I've also seen scenarios where, especially for athletes, where it's a disadvantage to not be on there, not only just to get
Right.
information, but because there's some promotion, right? Where it's like, oh, we're highlighting like the athletes, and that's supposed to, lead on to like college recruitment and kind of all of these things. And so you really kind of get sucked into it needing to be sort of a promotional element of helping your child along a certain pathway. I think the family account has seemed to be most helpful. And also for parents, again, that you still get to set the parameters, right? So that even if you're like, okay, we as a family agree that it makes sense for logistical reasons or, to nurture your sort of athletic aspirations reasons, that we're going to create this account for this reason. It doesn't necessarily mean we have to change our broader stance as it relates to using apps in different ways if that doesn't, align with your family values or where your child is developmentally.
All right. So one of the questions about sort of our responsibility as a broader set of community members, whether that's therapists, parents, caregivers, how can we assure that evidence-based guidance is accessible and culturally responsive for diverse families, people speaking other language? Where can people go? And I know that you guys as a group have developed some resources exactly for that. So I think we'd love to hear about them.
Sorry, I could not unmute. My mute button was completely uncooperative. It's given up at this point in the evening. So one of the resources, and we can throw it in the chat for you, that Dr. Sinclair-McBride and I have been working on for the last several years, which is a little bit broader than just thinking about sort of digital wellness, but that many families across the country have been finding useful, is a suite of materials called Building Bridges of Understanding. And basically what it is a whole, it's a pretty aggressive website. So I'm going to tell you, don't get overwhelmed. You're going to go to this website that Dr. Sinclair-McBride has put in the chat, and then you're going to go up to the top right and you're going to click on Kids and Families. And there's a whole suite of materials there that we have written in developmentally appropriate language for children, for teens, and for parents of children and parents of teens, that are helping with the most common behavioral health challenges, including a lot of really great, excellent sort of resources and news clips, many featuring Dr. Sinclair-McBride, related to digital wellness. And it's really targeting sort of the primary behavioral health concerns that we see among children and teens. So symptoms of depression, anxiety, ADHD, and disruptive behavior problems. We're adding new content all the time. There will be new content coming related to digital wellness. So you can kind of keep an eye on that, but it's all freely available for families. Everything is available in English and Spanish. And there are worksheets and sort of scripts and tips and tricks that you can use with your kids if they're exhibiting any of these common behavioral health challenges. But there's also just lots of videos that are meant to sort of support parents in their own journey navigating all of this chaos often, and to support you all in what you're doing. So it's all freely available. You can go to the website, and we'll be adding more content too. So we did want to share that with you. And I know Dr. Fogler's got some excellent resources as well.
I am just adding the tiniest of slivers to that pile. That is the mother lode. But if you want a little bit more, one of our pediatric fellows, now faculty, Marie Riley, wrote a small piece that is in one of our guides for middle schoolers with ADHD. I put that link in the chat. It's available online. Once you get to that link, if you control F for Riley, there's a really nice article she wrote on social media safety in 2018 that I think really holds up nicely today.
And then I'll give just one last additional shout out to our digital wellness lab. So to Dr. Logan's point about sort of how do we keep abreast of like what's the latest research and that kind of thing. So that lab is always putting out really interesting, innovative research, thinking about digital wellness and problematic media use, but they're also often summarizing sort of the latest findings. And so you can go to that website. You can also, obviously download the family media guide, but you can look there for some really nice summaries of what the current literature is telling us.
Excellent. Thank you. I've got a great closing question here. So despite the challenges we've discussed and all these kind of landmines and navigating, peer relationships in general and digital ones in particular, what gives you all optimism about today's generation of children and adolescents and their social connections? Come on, someone has to have some optimism. Come on.
No. Kids are savvy. Kids are smart. Kids are content creators of their own, and they create some wonderful things when given the opportunity. I really encourage you to get out there and watch the TikToks that are generated by kids that are pro-social, that are anti-bullying, that promote good causes. That gives me a ton of hope.
And there's still a lot of just like positivity and kindness amongst young people today. Like, I think we think so much about everything that's like horrible, but they're, working towards causes they believe in. They're helping each other. They're standing up for what's right, and they're using social media to do it often.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think there's often sort of this running joke among adults around like kids sort of like self-diagnosing and this kind of thing, because there's so many like TikToks and Instagram reels out there that are sort of casually throwing around behavioral health diagnoses. But the upside of that is that kids are talking about their behavioral health so much more. And I think that's really reducing the stigma around, I have anxiety, I have OCD, like I have ADHD. And there's something really empowering about that. And I think for the kids who are digesting that content appropriately with appropriate supervision, they're finding really empowering ways to share that message that makes other kids feel much less alone, and much more empowered to get support early. And that's a lot of what we're all doing as psychologists, is trying to help kids get support earlier in their life journey. And I think that's really, really positive, and something that wasn't possible before this current era of digital access.
Excellent. Thank you guys so much. I know we are at the hour and want to respect everyone's time, both our attendees and our presenters, but really appreciate all of you coming and sharing all of this information with us. I'll turn it over to Mark if he has any closing words.
Just also want to say thank you for this really important and informative conversation. We did record it, so we will share that out and make sure that people get the resources that you put in the chat. It's an ever-changing, frontier, right? And so thank you for the work that you do, every day, and keep at it. And we really appreciate your time. And thank you for the folks who came tonight.
Thank you all.
Having us. Take care.
All right. Good night, folks.